I have invented the world I see. I have invented the world I see. Lesson 32 in A Course in Miracles Workbook for Students, here on February the 1st of 2023. We're reading from the original edition in A Course in Miracles Workbook for Students. I have invented the world I see. I have invented the world I see. Today, we are continuing to develop the theme of cause and effect. Remember yesterday, I am not the victim of the world I see. Because we're the maker of the world. He's going to really help us to see this, that we're the cause of the world, and we can change our thoughts. We're just a thought away from happiness every moment. Today we are continuing to develop the theme of cause and effect. You are not the victim of the world you see because you invented it. You can give it up as easily as you made it up. You will see it or not see it as you wish. While you want it, you will see it. When you no longer want it, it will not be there for you to see. That's simple enough, isn't it? The idea for today, like the preceding ones, applies to your inner and outer worlds, which are actually the same. However, since you see them as different, the practice periods for today will again include two phases. One involving the world you see outside you, and the other the world you see in your mind. In today's exercises, try to introduce the thought that both are in your own imagination. Wow. Both the outer world and the inner world. It's easy to understand your inner world is your own making, your own imagining. But can you extend that to recognize your outer world is of your own imagining? That the inner world is actually the source of the outer? Again, we will begin the practice periods for the morning and evening by repeating the idea for today 2 or 3 times while looking around at the world you see as outside yourself. I've invented the world I see. And we just look around, okay? Then close your eyes and look around your inner world. Try to treat them both as equally as possible. Your inner world and what you see in that, try to see it the same way you would see your outer world. And then just say it a few times. I have invented the world I see. Repeat the idea for today unhurriedly, as often as you wish, as you watch the images your imagination presents to your awareness. Whoa, what a wonderful sentence. We're really embarking on an internal study with this thought. Repeat the idea for today. I have invented the world I see. Repeat the idea for today unhurriedly, as often as you wish, as you watch the images your imagination presents to your awareness. Can you do that? Stay focused on what your imagination presents to your awareness and tell yourself repeatedly, as often as you want, he says, I've invented the world I see. Take a little bit of responsibility. Boy, there's where our power is, because if we are the ones that make the world, we can unmake what we don't like and make what we do like instead. And that's what we have to ask for help in doing. But we have to know we need to do it. We have to know that we're in help, that we need help. And your feelings will tell you that. We learned yesterday, didn't we? For the 2 longer practice periods, 3 to 5 minutes are recommended with not less than 3 required. More than 5 can be utilized if you find the exercises restful. So you can take more than 5 minutes if you find the exercises restful. To facilitate this, select a time when few distractions are anticipated and when you yourself feel reasonably ready. The exercises are also to be continued during the day as often as possible. The shorter applications consist of repeating the idea slowly as you survey either your inner or outer world. It does not matter which you choose. The idea for today should also be applied immediately to any situation which may distress you. Apply the idea by telling yourself, I have invented this situation as I see it. Make it very specific. I've invented this situation as I see it. And begin to say, well, maybe I could see a better way. Maybe there's something else I could see, something else I could make, and have that open mind. Okay, so 2 longer practice periods, and then try throughout the day to bring it to your memory at least once an hour. Okay, I have invented the world I see, and we'll come back and sing that and do a little short meditation that you can extend on after I part. Okay, we're ready for in The Root of All Evil, Chapter 4, ready for Section 6, the ego-body illusion. And while you're turning there, let me tell you about another plant out of AdaptableLandscaping.com, and it's the Beach Bush Plum, a Prunes maritima. And the beach plums are native to the northeastern U.S. along the coast. Adaptable, we've grown them for years at the nursery. Fruits are tart and many, used in jams and jellies. The white profuse flowers bloom later than European, American, and Japanese plums. So they escape late frosts and are usually not a host for plum cucurlio. They have finished their egg-laying cycle by the time the beach plum sets its fruit. They also are free of brown rot fungus on the fruits. Plants are shrubs about 6 foot tall and wide, and they're good in zones 5 through 7. The Beach Bush Plum. Okay. Let's the ego body illusions, and there's so much here that I'd like to talk about, but I'm probably just going to read it. You may want to go back and read it again. All starts off with a Bible verse out of Romans 8:28. First part of that verse, all things work together for good, period, as Jesus starts off this section with. There are no exceptions. The Bible verse says, if it goes on, it says, all things work together for good to those who love God and that are called according to his purpose. But he's saying here that all things work together for good. I've always thought of it that the people that actually were trying to do God's will and doing that, they're going to see it. The ones that don't, everything's still working for the good of everyone, always. All things work together for good. There are no exceptions except in the ego's judgment. The ego resents everything it does not control. Control is a central factor in what the ego permits into consciousness, and one to which it devotes its maximum vigilance. This is not the way a balanced mind holds together. Its control is unconscious. A balanced mind, you want it to come from the unconscious, or really it's from the superconscious, but from that realm that you don't have to try to think about it consciously. The ego is further off balance by keeping its primary motivation unconscious and raising control rather than sensible judgment to predominance. The ego has every reason to do this according to the thought system which gave rise to it and which it serves. Sane judgment would inevitably judge against the ego and must be obliterated by the ego in the interest of self-preservation, ego self-preservation. A major source of the ego's off-balance state is its lack of discrimination between impulses from God and from the body. Any thought system which makes this confusion must be insane. Whoa, mixing levels is what they're doing. A major source of the ego's off-balance state is its lack of discrimination between impulses from God and from the body. Any thought system which makes this confusion must be insane. Yet this demented state is essential to the ego, which judges only in terms of threat or non-threat to itself. In one sense, the ego's fear of the idea of God is at least logical, since this idea does dispel the ego. Fear of disillusion from the higher source then makes some sense in ego terms. And higher source is capitalized, or for another name for God. But fear of the body, with which the ego identifies so closely, is more blatantly senseless. 71. The body is the ego's home by its own election. It is the only identification with which the ego feels safe, because the body's vulnerability is its own best argument that you cannot be of God. Wow, listen to that. So the ego feels safe because the body's vulnerability is its own best argument that you cannot be of God. This is the belief that the ego sponsors eagerly. You know, you've heard it all. If God is good, well, then why do you make evil? And not realizing that you're the player in this. You've invented the world you see. Trying to blame it on God. This is the belief that the ego sponsors eagerly. Yet the ego hates the body because it does not accept the idea that the body is good enough to be its home. Here is where the mind becomes actually dazed. Being told by the ego that it is really part of the body and that the body is its protector, the mind is also constantly informed that the body cannot protect it. This, of course, is not only accurate, but perfectly obvious. 72. Therefore, the mind asks, where can I go for protection? To which the ego replies, turn to me. The mind, and not without cause, reminds the ego that it has itself insisted that it is identified with the body. So there is no point in turning to it for protection. The ego has no real answer to this because there is none. But it does have a typical solution. It obliterates the question from the mind's awareness. Once unconscious, the question can and does produce uneasiness, but it cannot be answered because it cannot be asked. This is the question which must be asked. Where am I to go for protection? Even the insane ask it unconsciously, but it requires real sanity to ask it consciously. Wow, isn't that something? We can use our consciousness in a nice way. Asking this question, where am I to go for protection? The mind can ask. Even the insane ask it unconsciously, but it requires real sanity to ask it consciously. 73. When the Bible says, seek and ye shall find, and that's a quote out of Matthew 7:7, Jesus talking. When the Bible says, seek and you shall find, it does not mean that you should seek blindly and desperately for something you would not recognize. Meaningful seeking is consciously undertaken, consciously organized, and consciously directed. The goal must be formulated clearly and kept in mind. As a teacher with some experience, Jesus said, with a teacher with some experience, that's what I love about him. Let me remind you that learning and wanting to learn are inseparable. Learning and wanting to learn. Do you want to learn these truths? Are inseparable, he says. All learners learn best when they believe that what they are trying to learn is of value to them. We want to see the inestimable value of a peaceful mind, of a happy countenance. However, values in this world are hierarchical, and not everything you may want to learn has lasting value. 74. Indeed, many of the things you want to learn are chosen because their value will not last. The ego thinks it is an advantage not to commit itself to anything that is eternal, because the eternal must come from God. Eternalness is the one function which the ego has tried to develop, but has systematically failed. It may surprise you to learn that had the ego wished to do so, it could have made the eternal, because as a product of the mind, it is endowed with the power of its own creator. However, the decision to do this, rather than the ability to do it, is what the ego cannot tolerate. It has the ability, but it can't tolerate the decision to do it. That is because the decision from which the ability would naturally develop would necessarily involve accurate perception, a state of clarity which the ego, fearful of being judged, truly must avoid. The results of this dilemma are peculiar, but no more so than the dilemma itself. The ego has reacted characteristically here as everywhere because mental illness, which is always a form of ego involvement, is not a matter of reliability as much as of validity. The ego compromises with the issue of the eternal, just as it does with all issues that touch on the real question in any way. By compromising in connection with all tangential questions, it hopes to hide the real question and keep it out of mind. The ego's characteristic busyness with non-essentials is for precisely that purpose. Tangential, relating to or along a tangent. So it tried to get you to think about something that's not really the topic, get it off so that you're not thinking about the real issue, which the question we really want to be asking is, what is it for? Why do I want this? Where am I to go for protection? Was the way he said it. Paragraph 75, the results of this dilemma are peculiar, but no more so than the dilemma itself. The ego has reacted characteristically here as elsewhere because mental illness, which is always a form of ego involvement, is not a matter of reliability as much as of validity. The ego compromises with the issue of the eternal, just as it does with all issues that touch on the real question in any way. By compromising connection with all tangential questions, it hopes to hide the real question and keep it out of mind. The ego's characteristic busyness with non-essentials is for precisely that purpose. 76. Consider the alchemist's age-old attempts to turn base metal into gold. The one question which the alchemist did not permit himself to ask was, what for? He could not ask this because it would immediately become apparent that there was no sense in his efforts, even if he succeeded. If gold became more plentiful, its value would decrease and its own purpose would be defeated. The ego has countenanced some strange compromises with the idea of the eternal, making many odd attempts to relate the concept to the unimportant in an effort to satisfy the mind without jeopardizing itself. Thus it has permitted minds to devote themselves to the possibility of perpetual motion, but not to perpetual thought. 77. Ideational preoccupations with problems set up to be incapable of solution are also favorite ego devices for impeding the strong-willed from making real learning progress. The problems of squaring the circle and carrying pi to infinity are good examples. A more recent ego attempt is particularly noteworthy. The idea of preserving the body by suspension, thus giving it the kind of limited immortality which the ego can tolerate, is among its more recent appeals to the mind. Expended animation, huh? It is noticeable, however, that in all these diversionary tactics, the one question which is never asked by those who pursue them is, what for? Why are we doing this? 78. But this is the question you must learn to ask in connection with everything your mind wishes to undertake. What for? Boy, I remember when I was a kid, that was my favorite question. Why? What for? This, and with that childlikeness, I think is what he wants us to keep at, huh? Until we come into the knowing. This is the question which you must learn to ask in connection with everything your mind wishes to undertake. What for? What is the purpose? What it is you cannot doubt what it is, you cannot doubt that it will channelize your efforts automatically. When you make a decision of purpose, then, you have made a decision about your future effort, a decision which will remain in effect unless you change the decision. 79. Psychologists are in a good position to realize that the ego is capable of making and accepting as real some distorted associations. Let's read that sentence again. Psychologists are in a good position to realize that the ego is capable of making and accepting as real some very distorted associations. The confusion of sex with aggression and the resulting behavior, which is perceived as the same for both, serve as an example. This is understandable to the psychologist and does not produce surprise. The lack of surprise, however, is not a sign of understanding. It is a symptom of the psychologist's ability to accept as reasonable a compromise which is clearly senseless, to attribute it to the mental illness of the patient rather than his own, and to limit his questions about both the patient and himself to the trivial. He sees himself as separate from the patient, doesn't realize that he couldn't even have that patient unless he was having the same problems. And the last paragraph, 80. Such relatively minor confusions of the ego are not among its more profound misassociations, although they do reflect them. Your egos have been blocking the more important questions which your minds should ask. You do not understand a patient while you yourselves are willing to limit the questions you raise about his mind because you're also accepting these limits for yours. This makes you unable to heal him and yourselves. This makes you unable to heal him and yourselves. Be always unwilling to adapt to any situation in which miracle-mindedness is unthinkable. Wow. Be always unwilling to adapt to any situation in which miracle-mindedness or love-mindedness is unthinkable. That state in itself is enough to demonstrate that the perception is wrong. Okay, let's go back and take a look at our lesson. I have invented the world I see. And if you have a specific, take the 2 3 to 5 minute practice periods today. We'll spend one here for 2 or 3 minutes, and then you can go ahead and extend it longer after we hang up, after we get talking. Remember, look for in your thoughts, the inner world and the outer world are the same. Try not to make any hierarchical distinctions. Be in an unhurried way. And repeat the idea for today unhurriedly as often as you wish. As you watch the images your imagination presents to your awareness. Okay? In today's idea, try to introduce the thought that both are in your own imagination, the outer world and the inner world. So start with a couple minutes of looking around the outer world and saying to yourself, I have invented the world I see. And then go inside and do the same. I have invented the world I see. 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 have invented the world I see. I have invented the world I see. And if a temptation comes your way to where you might think that you'd want to look to fear instead of love, and then say it this way, more specifically. I have invented this situation as I see it. I have invented this situation as I see it. I have invented the world I see. 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 Oh, the power in this lesson, which means that you can change the way you see the world if you invented it. Ask God for help to see the world that He made, and that you can be in. You don't have to invent. I have invented the world I see. I have invented the world I see.